Well, thank you. This is such an inspiring group. I'm humbled, not worthy of even speaking to all of you. I'd rather just sit down and listen to your remarkable stories and journeys. Last night, hearing the gauntlet of the quick little question and answers amongst the winners. This is my second year of attending it. It is like one of my favorite moments in the year, and especially this year I needed it. I had to come and I had to experience that because it's a way for me to refuel and tap into the passion. So I started this business with my business partner, Scott Leonard, before many of you were born, back in 1994. I'm here really because they couldn't be. This is Elsa and Maria. It's their passion, it's their voice, along with the 1,500 other artisans that produce our indigenous and fair trade and organic fashion. It's that passion, it's their work that really deserves all the credit. They're remarkable human beings. So, I'll back up a little bit to how we started this journey. When I was a kid, growing up, I had the privilege of living in Central and South America, and I learned early on that we live in an extremely diverse world, and that my true worth was going to be what I gave back rather than what I took. And I have my parents to thank for that. So I went back to South America with my business partner, Scott, when I was 28 years old. And we often say, to climb a mountain. But it wasn't a mountain made of earth. We went to prove we could build a scalable, reliable cottage industry production model that respected the deep cultural tradition of the Andean people and wouldn't harm our environment. And we met knitters that were unbelievable. These women were incredible. Generations of knitting in their family, some of the most talented artisans that you could imagine, but they made so little money that oftentimes their young children had to go work for others. And we met herders that carried wool and alpaca fleece on their backs for miles down steep Andean terrain to trade on market corners for barely enough to put food on the table. And cotton farmers, no better off, working in fields with pesticides and chemicals and toxins and defoliants that were so nasty, like aldicarb, #1 selling insecticide for cotton today, so acutely poisonous that one drop accidentally absorbed by the skin is enough to kill an adult male. And many of you may not know this, and many of you may, but according to the Pesticide Action Network, over 10,000 people die a year from pesticide exposure. And I believe that most of those are in the developing country, agricultural industries, and it goes unreported. So Scott and I looked at each other back then in 1994, and we said, you know what, our path is chosen. We're committing ourselves to making fashion that honors people and the planet. And flash forward today, over 20 years later, we find ourselves leading a multi-million-dollar fashion brand. And I'm really proud to say it, but we've stayed 100% faithful to our founding organic and fair trade values. It's been a journey. Today we're sold in hundreds of best-in-class retailers throughout North America and Canada. We produce for amazing brands like Eileen Fisher. We're in our 10th year of manufacturing for Eileen Fisher, doing all of their organic cotton knitwear. We've won some great awards, international and global awards, Best Socially Responsible Women's Wear Brand, Top Innovator from Apparel Magazine, Best of the World. And those are important, not because, I can pat myself on the back, but they're important because they allow us to continue to lead and showcase a movement of creating fashion that is good for people and good for the planet. And that's where all of you guys have a part to play. How many of you remember this incident that happened in April in Bangladesh in the Rana Plaza. Maybe you heard about it in the True Cost movie that you mentioned. Maybe you actually heard about it in the news when you guys were, in middle school, elementary school, or high school. This, to me, was, 1,100 factory workers perished when it collapsed. And when it happened, it was one of the most infuriating things that I personally went through. It didn't have to happen. Structural damage in that building was actually predetermined. It was brought to the workers, to the management's attention by the workers. Yet they were threatened to go back in and work for fear of losing their jobs. And I know I know I'm talking to the choir, and that everyone in this room believes that every knitter, sewer, weaver should have the right to care for their family like we care for our own. That every garment we wear should do good for the people that make it, good for the people who sell it, and good for the people who buy it and who wear it. But who's going to make sure that happens? And if it's not us, then who? And, each of us have an incredible opportunity to make change, and you can start. You can start today. And you can ask who made your clothes. So before the Rana Plaza tragedy, we created the Fair Trace tool. With a snap of a QR code on our garments, you can meet the artisans that made the product, learn about the social impact of a purchase, see on a map where it came from, and we're really trying to bring transparency to a horrific industry. And when the Rana Plaza tragedy happened, we shared the tool. We made it out where we said this is not a competitive advantage. This is a tool that we want everyone to use. And unfortunately, it was more adopted by the food industry than it was by the fashion industry. But we still plug away and try to share it, and there's some amazing technology out there. What we do is we don't just source from a fair trade supply chain, we're continuously building one. And we've created a network of over 1,500 artisans that receive constant training, living wage, and opportunity to grow. And many have branched out now to start workshops of their own, which is amplifying the impacts of fair trade in their own communities. We work in some of the poorest regions throughout South America, where poverty is incredibly pervasive and persistent. So we have to continuously stay firm and resolute in our conviction to overcome the obstacles and lift people out of poverty. So our trace tool, on the front end, you get to see it when you're shopping. You can scan a product. You can experience the full story behind what went into that product. But on the back end, we use that trace tool to communicate directly to our artisans using SMS technology. So more people now have cell phones around the world than they do landlines. It's not our smartphones, but they actually can receive texts and voicemail. And we partnered with the Out of Poverty Index with Grameen, and we actually communicate to artisans on a regular basis, asking them questions like, are you better off than you were 6 months ago? Are you working in a safe environment? And then we ask economic indicator questions like, do you own a refrigerator, which allows us to measure a lot more than they own a refrigerator. They have transportation, they can purchase a big ticket item, they have electricity, they're doing meal planning. And then we take all that information back, and it allows us to measure the social and economic well-being of the actual artisans. And I'm really proud to say that in a country where over 50% of the rural population lives below the national poverty line, that we, in the textile industry, which is at the base of the pyramid, it is the lowest paid industry, had achieved a standard where 83% of our workforce are no longer at risk of falling below the national poverty line. And this is where we've received a lot of recognition on the economic development side of our business model. And if this tool were incorporated, or the technologies that exist today were incorporated by the brands that were working in Rana Plaza, they would have known ahead of time that there were issues in that building, that there were safety issues, and the onus would have been on them to be proactive and step in to make a difference. And that's exactly what we've been doing, is we've actually been going in and fixing problems and elevating and elevating and elevating. And that's how we've been able to transform an industry that tends to be at the bottom, the poorest of the poor, to 83% no longer at risk of falling below the national poverty line in a country where 50% of the world poverty rate, the entire country lives below the poverty line. So to conclude, I always want to take it back to a daily, our daily actions. And last night, Tamsin struck a chord with me because she had an epiphany that I had when she was driving down the road and she was looking up at the lights and she was thinking about the impact that every one of us have in our daily actions if we just made conscious decisions and how tremendous that would be. Well, the fashion industry is a $2.5 trillion industry. So just think about this. It's the second largest contributor to global pollution next to petroleum. 10% of carbon emissions come from our industry. 1 in 5 people on the planet work in some capacity in the fashion industry. 80% of the supply side of the fashion industry are women. 90% of textiles are not reused. It's the 3rd largest industrial wastewater polluter. The fashion industry can be an incredible vehicle for change and transformation if it's facilitated correctly, and if we actually make a decision. We all get dressed every day to simply ask, who made my clothes? What goes into it? So when you got up this morning, chances are you looked in the mirror and you thought about, you did your hair, you did your makeup, you got dressed, and you thought about how others would perceive you were going to look. But I ask you to layer onto that and say, do the clothes I wear reflect who I am and the value and my values? This is 100% recycled. This is 100% organic cotton. This is a bicycle inner tube reused. I'm not perfect. I'm not standing on a soapbox, and I don't believe in that. I believe that we need to take one step at a time, and if we can start making that shift, we can make amazing transformation happen. And I am happy to say, really quickly, that we're part of a group of 30 CEOs that meet twice a year that represent $150 billion in revenue, 86 countries, 240,000 employees. We're a tiny, we bring that average way down, by the way. But we meet twice a year to discuss sustainable fashion, and we discuss how to transform this industry so that it is socially just and environmentally sound. And that has, in 24 years of doing this, this is just something that's happened in the last 24 months, and it is remarkable that we're sitting at a table, indigenous, with the CEO of Nordstrom's, H&M, Donna Karan, you name it, and talking about the crossroads or the crosshairs of sustainable fashion and profitability, because that's how you get to them, is by talking about how it can be profitable. So thank you. I look forward to answering questions later.